Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're in Treaty 1 territory as the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Ron Merritt. I'll be your chairperson this morning. Introducing the panel members is Lynn Nesbitt to my left, and to her left is Mr. Robert Upton. And the individual from the assessment department is Jennifer Martins. And the recording secretary is Kara Belshaw. We'll be hearing application for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested has been described in each application, and we will limit discussions to those matters. The statements that the applicant and the assessor make are sworn testimony, and anybody speaking in these matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered market value in regards to the evidence. The board is appointed annually by City Council and it is independent of it, along with the City Administration. We make our decisions based on the evidence provided at the hearing and issue a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decision in respect to application may be appealed to the municipal board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to application for exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the board's order. In respect to the hearing, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant. Following the swearing in, it'll be then the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the other applicant may have, and then it'll be the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each party will have the opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once the evidence about the application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket this morning. The session will close after the application has been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible, as information on public hearings are live stream recorded and will be part of the public record. I ask our secretary to swear in Ms. Martins and Mr. Newman.
Swearing. Please state your name. Jennifer Martins. Do you swear the evidence you'll present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Please state your name. Do you swear the evidence you'll present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. That's me.
Shall we proceed with the docket according to what's here? So
that's fine. I'll mention to you that everything on the docket is what I will call a traditional apartment with one exception. And that exception is 10 Hallenquist. And 10 Hallenquist is an independent living facility. I know, Mr. Merritt, you have sat on those recently, so you've heard it before. The others may have heard it as well. I'm fine to do it in whatever order you want to do it, following the docket if you wish, but I just mentioned that to you.
okay. Does that sound fine, Ms. Martins?
Yes.
All right. So we'll go to 920 Corden Avenue. So whenever you're ready, you can take us through this property.
This is roll number 12023084000. 920 Corden Avenue. The assessed value is $2,130,000. The classification is 20, so it's residential 2, and the liability status is taxable. This is an apartment building built in 1954 with 24 suites. If we look on page 2, we have the income value summary. There are 24 one-bedroom suites. The average monthly rent per unit is $791.89. There is a vacancy rate of 2.4%, an expense rate at 49.29%, and a cap rate of 5.3%. This gives us our value of $2,130,000. On page 3, there are a few rental comparables. And on page 4 and 5 is the cap rate information. Page 6 is Municipal Act excerpts. And page 7 to 9 are the INE information. And page 10 is previous decision, and page 11 is a photograph.
And that's your presentation.
Yes, it is, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Newman, questions of the assessor?
Oh, that was a very concise presentation. I'll try and do as well. Okay, so some questions. And I'm gonna ask a series of general questions now and then hopefully not have to repeat them as we go along. This is a 1954 building.
Yes, it is.
With an effective age of 1954, so its original condition, so to speak, is continuing to be recognized. Page 2, your calculation. Is everything on that page model generated?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay. So the model, I assume, has certain breakpoints based on age for expense ratios and cap rates and things like that.
Yes.
So help me understand. I understand that when you get to 1974 or 1975, and then you go a year later, a year younger, so to speak, the cap rate comes down. Where's that break point?
Just want to make sure to give you the right ones. For cap rate, I think it's for all of them. At 1960, 1975, and applicable to this one, so 1946 to 1959.
Okay, I'm writing these down. Can we go in order?
Okay, 1945 and earlier. 1946 to 1959. 1960 to 1974. 1975 to 1997. 1998 and later.
Okay. And so this one falls in the 46 to 59 bracket,
Yes.
and therefore the model gives it a 5.3 cap rate?
Yes, there's also considerations for size and neighborhood and
So that may,
other such things.
so that may cause the cap rate to vary,
Yes,
even though it's in that age bracket?
yes. It's not, cap rate isn't just on age, it's also
Okay.
on, and the quality, the quality of the building, the age, the neighborhood, the size, these things will all cause some amount of flex.
Okay. And the expense ratios, are they governed by the same bracketing?
They are, but those are also, they are also influenced by size and by quality and condition.
All right. And of course, the model is a reflection of, I hesitate to use the word average, but I'm going to use the word average. It's a reflection of groupings as a whole as opposed to individual properties.
Yes, and we get that information from the income and expense mailers that are sent into us, so we use that information to apply the values
Okay.
within the model.
And so based on the model tells you that the gross potential rent for this property is $228,000.
Yes.
And if we then jump to your page 9, here's the actual income and expense statements for the property. And it tells us that the income in 2017 was $213,000, and in 2016 it was $198,000. So this property is not performing up to what the model says it ought to.
Correct.
And then your cap rate chart on page 4 So if we look at the multifamily section,
Yes.
we have the city indicating that the 80th percentile for low-rise buildings, and this one is a low-rise, correct?
Yes.
So low-rise buildings, the top end is 5.3%, which is what the cap rate is on this one. But the brokers, CBRE, is reporting 5.75 to 6 for what they call a low-rise B. Any idea what a low-rise B is compared to a low-rise A?
For ours, they're the same. And I'm not quite sure what the difference is between the low-rise A and the low-rise B for CBRE.
Okay. And then similarly, above that, there's the high-rise and the low-rise. Clearly, this isn't a high-rise.
Yes.
So Cushman and Wakefield is reporting 5 to 5.75, and Collier's 5 to 6. So this one's been set at 5.3, and again, the model's doing that, and that notwithstanding that it's a 1954 building.
Yes.
Okay. And have you done any calculation of the expense ratios with which this property operates?
I took a quick look at it. Seems to be significantly higher in 2017 than it was in 2016,
Yes.
which made me wonder if some of that was capital cost, or if some of that should have been amortized, or if there was some type of situation with that. So I wasn't sure what to make of that, but that would influence the amount that they're reporting as opposed to the amount that's in the model.
All right, those are my questions. Thank you.
I thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
Okay, so you have no indication, or do you have any indication? Did you look further into that R&M category in 2017? Because you're right, it's like 4 times higher or 3
Yes.
times higher.
No, I did not get an opportunity to take a really close look at why it was so, well, we only have 2 years, so was 2016 really, really low, or was 2017 really, really high? But with per unit, that's at $5,544.37 per unit. So
5,000,
5,544.
and that's in 2017?
Yeah.
And that's
So-
for R&M, yeah.
That's what they have for R&M, and that is significantly higher than what we usually consider to be in the normal range.
Okay. Now, you indicated that expense ratio, 49.29%, is normal.
Yes.
Would you expect to, is that sort of a normal, I think I heard you say that's for an average quality,
Yeah.
normal type place. This is a 1954 building. Would expense ratio normally be higher for a 1954 building?
When we're talking normal average buildings,
Yeah.
if you look around the city,
Mhm.
a 1954 building isn't really out of the range of normal.
Okay.
There's a lot of 1954 buildings, there's a lot of 1970s buildings, and this is, it's still generating significant rents. We aren't having a high vacancy problem. We aren't having, there's no reports of like extreme issues with it, so it's still performing as a normal average building.
Mhm.
The age is less a factor than the quality or condition would be.
Okay.
And if we're having issues with having high vacancy, then we would probably take another look at that and say, okay, what is the, like, is it high vacancy because it's now nearing the end of its economic life? Or what is the problem? But this one is not suffering from, doesn't appear to be suffering from high vacancy.
This capitalization rate evidence on page 5.
Yes.
There's several multifamily examples of cap rates.
Yes.
How is this relevant to your to this to the subject property?
We've given some samples of our cap rates just to show that we, not only is our capitalization rates done by the model, but that we have examples within our pool of sales that demonstrate that the model does apply, that we've got sales that are within what the model says. And these don't apply specifically to the property because these are the ones that we put in all of our briefs. So it's not specific for this property.
Okay, so there's not one here, I'm just looking at number of suites, like we really don't know anything about these properties to even know if they're comparable or not, right? Like they're all different, we don't know
Well,
the suite mix, we know nothing.
Exactly, like, at first glance, the Maxwell might look similar, but
Right.
it's,
Right,
it's in a different neighborhood,
Yeah,
first and
it-
foremost, and
yeah.
it's 23 units, but are those units 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom?
so
or-
we can't put any weight on these specifically for this property.
No, these are to show the validity of our cap rates, not to show the validity of the cap rates specifically for this property.
I had one other question about your rent comparables on page 3. They all, at first glance, look, within, sort of support your average monthly rent. But you have some that are masonry bearing walls versus the wood or steel stud. Does that make a difference in any way?
For what I've been looking at, I haven't seen that makes a difference. Most people, when they're looking at renting an apartment, I don't think they really go and say, well, this one's in the neighborhood I want, and it's got the number of bedrooms I need, and it's within the range that I can afford, but it's wood and steel frame, so I'm gonna pass on that one.
Just didn't know in terms of the comparables, if they would be comparable to your subject property in terms of
I think
type of apartment.
in regards for the rental amount, I don't use that as something that would be a deciding factor.
Okay.
In regards to total value, that might make a difference with the construction and the length of time that the building would last. So the length of its economic life would perhaps be influenced by the type of construction, but I don't think the rents are.
Thank you, that's all the questions.
I thank you. Mr. Upton?
No, I think that covers it for me, thank you.
I just have one question, Ms. Martins. On page 9, the financial statement for the subject property for I guess it's December 31st, 2017, they have a gross, I guess, income, $213,426.
Yes.
And the city, I guess, are at a higher figure.
Yes, they
So, but also, in the financial statement, it talked about miscellaneous revenue of about, $4,400. Do you know what that is?
I'm not sure what that is, but it does say, if you look over on page 8, it does say that there is outdoor parking. I'm not sure if that influences at all. I'm not sure if there's, because the statement here doesn't say whether there's, like, if they have a laundry room, which might generate money from the laundry room, which a lot of the properties do, or, it
So
doesn't really say.
So in looking at the financial statement and then looking at the workup, your gross is substantially higher.
Yes.
Okay.
It's because it was from the model.
Okay.
We do get, what is it, approximately 12,000?
So there's
Of these
no
guys?
override or anything like that here, or was there?
Well, no, there's not an override on this property for the rent. We do get about 12,000 of these back a year, so it's very difficult to go into all of them. It would be prohibitive, the work.
So all this is model driven and the
Yes.
cap rate and, okay. The expenses for this type of age of the building, does it run around the, according to the model, 49% roughly? Or-
We usually do, for repair and maintenance, there's a rough range, and it's usually around $1,000 1,200, roughly. So what is if you look at the 2016 R&M, that one was at $1,890 per unit. And even that is a little on the higher side. So perhaps they did, I'm not sure if there was any type of upgrades to some of the properties to make sure that it is still leasable, so they still can find tenants.
And for my last question, from assessments to, from the previous assessment to this one, what is the average increase on apartment buildings? I know it would vary according to area, but roughly speaking, do you have that?
The range, the acceptable range is within 20%. If it's getting really close, or like if it's getting over and above much more than 20%, but the average is roughly 20.
Okay, I thank you. Mr. Newman, your presentation.
So let me perhaps start just where you were asking questions. Now, if you go to my material, page 4, of the attachments. So here is the detailed statement for 2016. So that'll be the second column in from the left, current year to date. And then if you go 2 columns over, you'll get previous year to date. So what you're getting really on this page is both 2015 and 2016. You asked Mr. Merritt about the rental income being achieved or the total income being achieved. That's obviously one of our concerns here. The model puts it at $228,000. You can see the total receipts in 2015 were 187, in 2016 it's 198, and in 2017 we know that it was $213,000. Any way you look at it, it's not getting to the 228 that the city is at. You've also got a more detailed listing of the expenses of this property. So for 2016, where the net operating income is $77,163, I can tell you that the expense ratio is 61% of revenue. And for 2015, where the net operating income was $81,570, I can tell you the ratio was 56.47%. Clearly from my perspective, the model's good in the sense that it gives us all jobs, I guess, in a sense. But it doesn't always work perfectly, obviously, and I think this is one of those cases where it's not working perfectly in the sense that I think it's overstating the revenue to an extent, and it's understating the expenses. We all have to have in mind, as we all know, that apartment buildings are governed by rent control, and therefore there are limitations on what you can do in terms of the rents. And at page 2 of our attachments, we've given you the full rent roll, so you know what the rents are for every single unit in the building. And we ultimately take those rents and we translate them into page 5, our workup, because that's how we've calculated our gross potential income based on those rents in place at that point at $205,788. We've used the assessor's 2.4% expense ratio. We've gone somewhat higher on the expenses based on our analysis of the 15 and 16 expenses, and which I told you earlier, we're at 56% for 15 and 61% for 16. We've gone to 53%. And then, of course, we get into the conversation about the cap rate. And so I want to talk about cap rate for a moment. So we've got the assessor's cap rate chart, which indicates to us that low-rise buildings at the 20th and 80th percentiles range from 4.9 to 5.3. The brokers, however, CBRE, for example, is suggesting 5.5 to 6. This is a 1954 building with an effective age still of 1954. That's probably reflected in the rents. Things have happened in the apartment world in Winnipeg over the last 5 years, or over the 5 years leading up to the reference date. It used to be that if a suite went vacant, it filled within a week or two, truly within a week or two. There was effectively no vacancy in Winnipeg. But we've had low interest rates for a long time. Whenever we have low interest rates, developers see an opportunity, and so they began to come into the marketplace. And we've had very, very significant amounts of construction over the last number of years in the Winnipeg marketplace. And we've had construction in two forms. You've had it in the form of what I'll call truly rental buildings, but you've also had a lot of condo construction. And what's happened with some of those condo units is that they have leaked into what I call the rental market. And so it used to be, as I said, that you fill a vacancy within a week or two. I know now that there are buildings of this vintage. They will frequently have vacancies for a month or two and even into a third. Because of course on anniversary date, you get a significant turnover, and it takes time to fill that turnover sometimes. You see way, way more discounting of rents than you ever used to. Discounts didn't exist before. Now you pick up the rental guide at the Safeway on the rack. Everybody's offering rental discounts, and that's a reflection of what's happened in the apartment market generally. So at the end of the day, what we're suggesting to you in respect of this building, because I think the world has changed as I've suggested for apartment buildings, interest rates increased between April 1 of 16 and April 1 of 18. The bank rate went up by 75 basis points. Typically when bank rates go up, you see interest rates go up, and then you see capitalization rates go up as well. And so ultimately, we're suggesting that considering the age of this building, that a higher capitalization rate than 5.3% is appropriate. That seems to be supported by the brokerage data. And so ultimately, we're suggesting to you that the calculation reflected in our material at page 5 shows a value of $1,716,000, and that's the value we're suggesting that you select. Subject to questions, those are my submissions.
I thank you. Ms. Martin, questions?
Yes. The page 4 of your attachments,
Yes.
are you aware that this information was not given to the department?
No, I'm not aware of that.
I'm just trying to see the difference between. Do you recognize that it is difficult to apply expenses and to enter them effectively into the model if we receive inconsistent information between the income and expense reporting period and ad appeals?
Well, in concept, I suppose, but I don't think you've received inconsistent information.
Okay. Okay, that's everything, thank you.
I thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
No, I have no questions.
Mr. Upton?
Yes, a question here. You've shown on your page 5 the potential gross income of $205,788.
Yes.
And, but on the statement, it shows that there is in previous years parking revenue, 5,800 one year, 6,100 the other year.
Yes,
These, this figure does not include parking?
you're correct.
So parking has to be added to that?
Certainly some allowance would be appropriate.
About $6,000 or something in that area?
Yeah, yes, in a general sense.
Okay, so that would bring it up to 212, probably somewhere in that area?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, let's see, here. You agree with the vacancy rate, you talked about vacancy, but you do agree with the vacancy rate of the assessor
I do,
at 2.4?
yeah. Can I just make an observation to you? It's interesting what's happened. Because of all the work that's been done on apartment buildings, buildings like this, which have what I'll call a lower rental structure, actually are able to do a little bit better in the sense of vacancy, because people are being displaced. The rents have increased in a lot of buildings, and it's causing tenants to be displaced because they can't afford the rents. And they tend to migrate looking for the lower rent structure buildings. And so this one is at a lower rent structure, relatively speaking. And I think that's what's happening here, and that's why the vacancy is down.
Okay. Now also, you've shown your expense amount here on my page here. I think you said 53% or something like that.
Yes, I've used 53%. 2016 was 61%, and 2015 was 56.47%, and I stabilized at 53%.
Okay, you said 61% was when?
2016.
2016. And 2017 is 56.4?
No, 2015 was
50.
56.4. 2017 had that significant expenditure in
Yeah.
R&M, so I
Right.
stayed away from that.
Right. Just a figure of 106,000 in expenses. Okay, which is not too far off what the assessor is suggesting. It's 109,000.
Yes, it's not too far off.
Not too far. Okay, thank you.
Different starting point in gross potential income, of course.
Sure. We'd have to change the potential gross income to add the parking.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Noman, I guess on your page 5, this is the current rent roll. Is there a date for this?
Yeah, so if you look at page 2 of my attachments, as of 12/31/17, of the attachments.
Oh, okay.
At the top, 12/31/17.
Okay. Yeah. I noticed that, is there a caretaker on site? Or is there an allowance there? Because I guess on your second column there, it's, his rent is, or her rent, doesn't matter, $438.
Yeah,
Okay. So is there a caretaker on site?
yes.
Or,
I believe that if you look back to page 2, the rent roll,
yeah.
you can see that unit number 2, there's a reference to CAR 1 bed, and I believe that's a reference to the caretaker.
Okay. And as Mr. Upton had said, the rent roll here doesn't include the parking.
My work of
Your, yeah,
Yes.
it doesn't?
It does not.
It doesn't, okay. I think that's all the questions I have. So Ms. Martin's summation, if you so desire.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Newman?
I'm good, you heard me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to number 2, which is number 65. Is it Paget?
Paget.
Paget Street. Ms. Martin, whenever you're ready.
This is roll number 10006421600. The assessed value is $11,156,000. The class code is 20, so it's residential 2, with a liability status of taxable. And this was built in 2008 with 62 suites, and on record we have 62 indoor parking spots and 19 outdoor parking spots. On page 2, we have the income value summary. 62 two-bedroom suites with an average monthly rent per unit at $1,351.24. A vacancy rate of 2.4%, an expense rate at 43.15%, and a capitalization rate of 5%, which gives us our $11,156,000. On page 3, there are some rent comparables ranging in rent from $1,217 to $1,377 per unit per month. On page 7, we have the income statement showing at the very top that the residential rent is very similar to our gross potential rent. And on page 11, we have photos. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, questions?
Yes. Again, everything on page 2 is model generated, correct?
Yes, it is.
Let's talk about the expense ratio. So I gather there must again be some bracketing or classification for buildings that are newer, which indicates a lower expense ratio.
Yes.
And do you know where that break point is? Is it similar to what you talked about earlier?
Yes.
So you're saying 1998 and younger will get uniformly a 43.15% expense ratio?
No.
Okay.
That's the grouping, and within that, it's not just age. These things, this is how old it is, so that's the number we're giving. It's not a shopping list.
Okay.
There's other factors that will apply to it, such as the quality, the condition, and I don't know what else is in the model that will influence it, but it's one of the factors that will set it into a different grouping.
Have you ever heard the expression hot and cold to describe an apartment?
No.
So the concept is that some apartment buildings, the tenants will pay for hydro sometimes because all the units are separately metered. It may have electric heat. They'll pay for the heat because they're separately metered. That's the concept. So is it a hot building in the sense that the tenants pay, or a cold building in the sense that they don't? So if you look at your page 3, your page 3 in reference to your comps, at the very bottom says heat in rent.
Yes.
So I'm gathering the model seems to recognize that concept in some way, that sometimes heat is included and heat not.
Yes.
Okay. What about this building? Is the heat in or out of the rent?
I don't know.
Okay. And did you do any analysis of the expense ratio in this building relative to the income? Or is it simply the model that you're presenting?
And I'm just presenting the model.
All right, fair enough. And if we look at your photo on page 11,
Yes.
the yellow lines, those are the property lines, correct?
Yes.
And this is off the city's mapping system?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So when we look to the left side of the photo, we can see there's the square, I'll call it, that represents the property lines of the building.
Yes.
And you can see that that property line runs through what I'm gonna call the middle of that road.
Yes.
Then the property line for the building to the left, it's not right up against the property line for the subject property, there's a space in between.
Yes.
Do you know what's happening there?
I'm assuming that's so that, I'm not sure which of these properties are owned by similar ownership
Okay.
or how that's broken down if, how the developer did it. But usually if we have a space like that that looks like a roadway, that's to allow the next building, access to the public road.
And do you have any idea who's responsible for the infrastructure associated with that?
I am not, like I said, I'm not sure what the developer is or who's the ownership of this, but if that's not city property, that's not the city's responsibility. But I'm not sure if this is a bigger development that is taking care of a number of properties.
And if it's not the city's responsibility, it means that the snow clearing of these roadways, which access ultimately the public roads, will be the responsibility of the property.
Well, similar to your driveway is your responsibility.
Sure.
Yeah.
But unlike many other apartment buildings that are directly on public roadways, this one will have an expense to clear these access points.
I would say that had the developer done a slight turn, then the driveway would be directly out onto Paget. And I know there's many reasons why people do many things. But if I choose to put my driveway all the way around my property before it goes into my garage, then I will at some point have extra expense. It's very lovely and it gives more privacy, but there's good and bad of all decisions.
I understand.
Yeah.
But having made that decision, the
Yeah.
building is situated as it is, configured as it is, and if I'm the next buyer coming in, I'm buying that configuration
Yes.
and that additional expense.
Absolutely.
All right. Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt, questions?
Yeah, I'm just looking at your page, well, we'll start with page 3, I guess,
Okay.
your comparables.
Mm-hmm.
So Paget Street is somewhere close to the Sterling Lion area.
Yes,
And
and on page
these-
11, it's right off Sterling Line.
Yeah, and these other ones
Mm-hmm.
seem to not be anywhere close to Sterling Lion. Did you consider looking for properties nearer to the subject, or?
I did, and I was working at it, but the problem is that with these properties, as they're being built, and we need to look back so that we have income information that is not post-reference. So I'm assuming that in the upcoming cycles, we will have more information. But right now, I was focused more on being a newer construction and being with more units and with being the similar mix of suites. Because even if it's next door, if it has only one-bedroom suites, that's not really comparable either.
Okay. And what is happening there with comparable number 1? There's no suites.
I just noticed that. It has suites, and they are two-bedroom suites. I'm just
Okay.
not sure at the moment how many of them there are.
Okay. But we won't look at that one
Oh,
then. Where is
actually-
Burning Glass Road?
That's over by Sage,
Sage Creek area?
yes, thank you.
Right, okay. I
Actually,
get-
we should be able to figure out how many units there are. $125?
125 units?
Yes.
So that's a significantly
Ish.
bigger, I see it has.
Yeah, it's about double.
Okay. And is there a difference as to whether or not 4-story versus 6? Does that make a difference in terms of comparables or?
Not as much. It would make a difference if they were all townhomes compared to being, but as long as it is still a building. That one is 2 buildings, so if you look at it, it's divided about in half, so one building has, you know, when you're looking at 125 units as opposed to 62 units, it's 125 units between two buildings.
Okay.
So the buildings are similar size, except you're right, one has 6 stories and one has 4 stories. And the subject apartment, the subject has larger, on average, larger units.
Okay. And larger floor area per unit
Yes.
by a fair amount.
By a fair amount.
Okay. Okay, now I'm just looking at your I&E, or income statement. It starts on page 7.
Yes.
I guess it goes through all the way to page 10.
Yes.
And did you look at that when you were doing your analysis? Because the average monthly rent, I'm assuming that's a model rent on your page 2?
Yes, it's
Pretty bang on.
It's pretty bang on. This may have been one of the properties that was, when it was reviewed, that some of the characteristics were adjusted to come closer to.
Okay.
But
And ditto with your,
the thing is, being
Yeah.
fairly new, it could also have been that the characteristics were adjusted when it was first put on the roll to be
Okay.
very similar.
okay. And obviously the annual gross potential income is also pretty bang on. Well, it's bang on. It's $100 out. Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Upton?
Yes, just referring again to the income statement that we were
Okay.
just talking about.
Yes.
I noticed on the income statement, there's parking of $49,525 income.
Yes.
You have not included that in your,
In the model?
you haven't included that.
No.
So there's an extra $50,000 roughly of income here that has to be accounted for.
It should be, yes.
I see this is indoor parking in this building, in the basement.
Yes.
So I assume that's where they figure it comes from that. Sometimes one parking space goes with the apartment rent, and other times it's added to it. In this case, it looks like it's added to it.
Well, it looks like there, and it might be that for when you're renting, you rent it for a certain amount with a parking spot included, but when they're doing their finances, they can divide it out however they'd like to. But I believe that there's also outdoor parking. It says that there's also outdoor parking, so I'm not sure if that's an extra. that
Well,
they
usually with these
do.
kind of apartments, 2
Yeah.
stalls are available to the tenant, 1 indoor, 1 outdoor. That's
Yeah.
a normal situation, I think. But so there's $50,000 of income here that you haven't accounted for.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. To follow up, I guess, Ms. Martins, how would the model miss this?
It's not so much that it's missed, it's that with our income, we usually have it kind of rolled like in with the rent.
Yeah, but it's a lot of money that's missing here and value.
Yes.
Okay. This is typical of the model because of the age, et cetera, so the 5% cap rate is probably the lowest you go. You wouldn't go, would you go lower than 5%?
If you look at page 4. We do have cap rates, our 20th percentile is 4.9, and it shows that there are cap rates as low as 4. And if you look over on page 5, we have sales that have cap rates that are below 5.
Okay. Mr. Newman, your presentation?
So if you look at the assessor's page 11, the photo, This is a life lease project, sponsored by the Lions Club. The properties around it are a combination of independent living facilities that Mr. Story has represented for many years, put together by the Artis REIT people. And so what makes this property a little bit unique is that the roadway that I was asking the assessor about, there's a shared agreement, I'm advised. And at the end of the day, the buildings have responsibility for the infrastructure that's associated with that roadway. And of course, they have responsibility to clean it and maintain it, which is different than many apartment buildings will have. And I mentioned that in the context ultimately of expenses. Also, in this building, all of the utilities are included within the rent. There's no additional charge to the tenants. And that's why I was asking questions about the model. And, you know, it's all well and good to have a model that sets newer buildings at a 43.15% expense ratio, but that model needs to take into account whether the utilities in the building are paid by the landlord or by the tenants. And in this building, everything is paid by the tenants. And ultimately, that leads to an issue about the expense ratio. I've accepted the assessor's rent of $1,351 per month. As the assessor noted, and it's always been my understanding that the way the model is constructed, the model does include additional sources of revenue. That's always been my understanding, and that's why I accepted it. The fact that this property generates some additional revenue in the form of the parking, it is what it is. But again, the workings of the model are such that the model rents are always set to include all sources of revenues. So I have fundamentally two issues in this matter. It's not the gross potential income, it's not the vacancy, it's the expense ratio. And if you look to page 2 of the text of my material, I've made reference there to the financial statements, and I included July 31 of 18, and if I've stepped over the bounds in doing that, I accept that, and we can ignore it. But what I did is, as part of my materials, you've got the income statements for the periods ending July 31, 15, 16, 17, and 18. And I did that in part because I wanted to show you the consistency of the expenses over the years. I also asked the property manager for a more detailed makeup of the financial information because I wanted to understand whether amortization was found within these expense statements, and ultimately the answer is yes, amortization is in those expense statements to the extent of $260,000 per year. And so when I look at those expense statements, and you know, let's look at page 3 of my attachments, just as an example. You can see down at the bottom that the expense total is $1,104,000, but you would have to take off of that the debt service, which is $321,000. So now we're down to $783,000. I am aware that also in there is amortization of $260,793. So if I take off $260,000, now I'm down to $520,000 of expenses. And when I look at that $520,000, comparing it to the revenues of $1,028,000, my expense ratio is running at 50.5%. And that's what I found generally when I looked at all of these statements, is that the expense ratio, and I think it's for a combination of reasons. I think in part it's the fact that truly, absolutely everything is paid for in this building by the owner, by the landlord. Additionally, it's got electric heat, and electric heat is getting more expensive, of course, with all the hydro increases. Additionally, you've got the issue with the roadway and the infrastructure, and that leads to additional expense in terms of maintenance and snow clearing. So I think it's the combination of those things that is leading to a higher ratio of expenses. And as I say, I went through the process of, for each of 15, 16, and 17, and subtracting out the debt service and the amortization. You don't see the amortization in those statements, but again, my advice was that in the maintenance and repair item, the amortization is found there as well. And my advice is that the amortization is in each of the 3 years, $260,793. And at the end of the day, what that does is that brings us to an expense ratio of approximately 50%. And you will ultimately see, if you look at page 14 of my attachments, that what I did is I started with the $1,351 a month, so that creates $1,005,000 of gross potential income. It says 2.6% there for vacancy, and I know my intention was to use the assessor's 2.4, but I guess in keying it in, it slipped a little, so that can be corrected if need be. And then I've gone to the 50% expense ratio, which turns out to $489,000. And I'm comfortable when you look at all the income and expense statements, when you make the adjustment for debt service and you make the adjustment to pull out amortization, I'm comfortable that the expenses are going to be somewhat above $489,000. And so that's why I've used that. Then in terms of capitalization rate, I moved the capitalization rate upward by 25 basis points. I've done that for two reasons. Firstly, this roadway business creates a bit of an encumbrance on this property. It is different than a traditional property in the sense that access to the property is shared, it's not controlled, and that creates a different perspective from a purchaser's perspective. There's always an issue about getting along with your neighbor, and what happens if you don't, and who pays for the expenses. So that was one of the reasons. The other reason is that this building is, as I indicated to you, it's a life lease project. Trying to sell this thing in the marketplace creates all sorts of complexities. I'm not sure it's doable, frankly. And I know this is a hypothetical process we're involved in here. So for the combination of those reasons, I increased the capitalization rate by 25 basis points. And I was also of the view that, as I said to you in my earlier presentation, that capitalization rates have moved. They're not as low as they used to be. And certainly I don't think there's a downward progression in capitalization rates anymore. So for the combination of all of these reasons, that's the value I've come up with. And that is my presentation, subject to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions of the applicant?
As a life lease, there's usually a buy-in. Is there a buy-in on these units at Paget?
There was, yes.
How does that buy-in, is that buy-in used at all to offset the expenses?
Theoretically it is. I think practically what it allowed them to do is go to the market and get the financing, because the buy-in turned into the equity in essence.
Okay. And as such as well, would not a hypothetical sale, would not the buy-in amounts and the equity that's in there, would that not be a bonus to help offset the risk of the
No,
purchase?
because ultimately, those buy-in amounts have to go back to those occupants.
Okay. Thank you.
I thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
No, I have no questions.
Mr. Upton?
Just a supplemental question to the assessor. When you use your expense ratio of 43%, does that include all types of buildings, both with utilities paid for and not paid for by the tenant? Do you have any kind of a breakout of those expense ratio approximations?
When we do enter it into the information that we get from the tenants, when it is broken out nicely and we get actual details, then yes, it is broken out. So our model does recognize, and it takes that into account.
But you only have one model. You don't have a model for, as Mr. Newman describes, a hot building and a cold building. You don't have that kind of breakout, the one ratio.
Not all of the information is right here, like the whole model isn't as it applies to this, but the information that has been entered in as far as what is included and what isn't included from the information that we get from the income and expense mailers, it would be applied and it would influence we know whether it's electric heat or not electric heat. So when the model is going through the factors, you don't get everything here, but it is working behind the scenes in the computer. So it will, and some of those factors, we found that the information that we get doesn't justify a large switch in the expense ratio. So that, the model is working on a lot of factors that I haven't touched on.
Okay, and Mr. Newman, you asked for the cap rate of 5.25, and do you have any evidence to that? Is that your estimation of cap rate?
It's my estimation, but it's based on the fact that, the two reasons I articulated to you. One, the road configuration creates, I'll suggest to you, a different level of risk compared to a traditional scenario where you're fronting onto a public road and have direct access, and it creates the risk in two ways. One, in the sense of the expenses, but that's picked up by higher expense ratio, so I'm not doubling that up. But it's also picked up, it also arises, however, in the sense that from an ownership perspective, imagine you buy your house, but you've got to share part of your yard with your neighbor. That's a different type of ownership. You've now got, it's a form of encumbrance almost on the property, so that's why I've done it.
Okay,
And
thank you.
can I just address something you directed to the assessor, your
Yeah,
follow-up
sure.
question about hot and cold buildings? The reality is, most developers who build new buildings, they build them so they can offload as much of the expenses as they can on their tenants. And so they'll put in separate meters. This one, again, built by the Lions Club as a sponsor, I think frankly they were trying to save some money in terms of their development costs, so they didn't do that. But I'm going to suggest to you that the majority of the new buildings being built are separately metered. I can't tell you every one is, but the majority are being separately metered. And I'm even aware of situations where property managers have done a rehabilitation on an older building. They actually put separate electric meters in for each of the units, again, because they wanted to be able to push that cost down to the tenants. So my sense would be, but I don't have the benefit of all the data the city does, my sense would be that the majority of the newer builds, probably the great majority, are all separately metered, and that's why I believe that expense ratio is skewed a little bit downward and doesn't adequately take into account buildings where all those expenses are included in the rent.
Yeah. And in this case, it's a 7% difference or something between you and the assessor.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, to do with the parking.
Yeah.
You're very close with the assessor on gross income.
Yes.
And you're saying that the parking should not be added to?
Well, again, as the assessor noted, and this has always been my understanding, the city's models are built to pick up the entirety of the various revenue streams that are associated with the property. You know, ultimately, if there's, I don't deny that the parking is there, obviously it is. And if the board's of a mind to add it, then the board will, but they'll also add the appropriate expenses associated with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Summation of the party?
No, thank you.
Newman, you're okay?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. We'll go to the independent living in number 10 Holmquist Drive, so whenever you're ready.
Thank you. This is roll number 07438630600. The assessed value is $13,814,000. This is classified as a 20 with a liability of taxable. This is an apartment building. It's one building with 4 stories, built in 2005 with 126 suites. There are 8 indoor parking spots and 16 outdoor parking spots. Looking on page 2, we have 118 one-bedroom suites and 8 two-bedroom suites. The average monthly rent per unit is $825. There's a vacancy rate of 2.6, expense rate of 43.15, capitalization rate of 5, and that gives us our $13,814,000. On page 3, we have a variety of comparable rents ranging from $780 to $966. These are in the same market region. Page 7 and 8 are the income and expense mailer. And page 9 is an overhead picture and the map. And this is one of the Sturgeon Creek development. It's across the street from St. Boniface Hospital. Oh, sorry, not St. Boniface, Grace Hospital. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Newman, questions?
Yes. You've not inspected the subject.
No, I have not.
So it's got 126 units,
Mhm.
but it's got a total of 24 parking stalls.
Yes,
Pretty unusual.
not for this type.
Okay, I'll accept that,
Thank you.
because this type is different, isn't it?
This type is different.
Right. But the methodology used to value it is what I'll call the traditional apartment methodology.
Yes.
And essentially what the department does, so let's back up a step. An occupant of this facility will pay a significant sum of money each month, and as part of that, they get their meals, they get activities, there's support staff around, there may be a nurse around. It's that combination of things.
Mhm.
And they might pay $3,000 a month.
Yes.
But a lot of that $3,000 is for non-assessable services, and so the city has to find a way to extract and get to what I'll call the real estate rent.
Yes.
And the way the city does that is to look for rents in the marketplace to use as the proxy for what the rents would be here, correct?
Mhm.
Creates a gross potential income, applies a traditional apartment market vacancy, applies a traditional apartment market expense ratio, gets to an NOI, and applies a traditional apartment capitalization rate.
Yes.
Okay. And you and I had a lovely conversation about this last night.
Yes, we did.
We were both in the office late last night, and we had a wonderful conversation. And some of the board members I know have heard this before, and I know that Mr. Merritt, within the last 3 weeks, has heard 6 of these, so he's familiar with this. But I'm doing this only to illuminate the issue for the board. So, and That's why when I asked you about the parking stalls, and you would agree for a traditional apartment
Yes.
of 126 units, 24 stalls would be unusual.
Yes, it would be very
But for
unusual.
this one, because the people are older and generally aren't driving, this is an adequate number of stalls for this facility.
Yes.
All right. The expense ratio is not site-specific to a facility of this type, it's apartments generally, correct?
Yes, it would be very difficult to split out the business expenses and the apartment expenses and, you know, do the replacement of extra handrails. Is that really an apartment expense or is that a business expense? So this is, yes, it's treating it as a basic apartment building, not as as a business.
You're aware that the units within this facility do not have kitchens as one would typically find in an apartment?
Yes. That being said, the kitchens are there to provide meals for people, and because this is a different situation, even though they don't have kitchens, they do have meals. So we don't apply a business expense or a business valuation on the kitchen because it's taken into consideration that the meals provided, if it's a typical apartment building, they would be able to have meals, and since they're not, then we don't charge a valuation on the commercial kitchen.
Okay. Is the 5% capitalization rate primarily a function of the age of the building?
The age, the size, the neighborhood,
Okay.
the quality of the building,
But not the use.
but not the use.
So in other words, it's a traditional apartment cap rate.
Yes.
And would you agree with me that a facility of this type will not trade in the marketplace as would a traditional apartment?
Absolutely.
Because it will only trade as part of a going concern sale.
Yes.
I think those are my questions. Thank you.
I thank you. Ms. Nesbitt,
No, I have no questions.
Mr. Upton.
None at this point, thank you.
I don't think I do either. So, Mr. Newman, your presentation.
So, 3 weeks ago or so, I had a docket that had 8 buildings on it. 6 of them were these independent livings and 2 were traditional apartments. I don't know why this one wasn't on that docket. It should have been. It would have been a lot simpler for everybody. But be that as it may, here we are. So, Mr. Merritt, you get to hear some of this again. The others, maybe you've heard it in prior cycles, I'm not sure. But I have to tell you a bit of a story, of course. So, this facility is operated by a company called All Seniors. They have 6 of these facilities in Winnipeg. You see their advertising on TV all the time. It's got the sweet elderly people who talk about how wonderful their life is for having moved into a facility like this. I only hope that's true, and that those aren't bought testimonials. But people come to facilities like this, I think frequently at the urging of their children, who are concerned for their parents who are getting on a little bit in years, and they want to be sure that they've got a community around them. They want to be sure that they're comfortable. They want to be sure that they're safe. They want to be sure that to the extent they need reminders to take their medication, there's somebody around to remind them about that, all of those things. And so they charge a big buck. It's expensive to reside in one of these places, but you get a package of services, and as we've discussed, we need to extract what is the real estate from what is not the real estate. And so the methodology you see now, my briefs used to actually put a lot more material in them. I've actually toned them down because in many ways over the last 3 or 4 cycles, the methodology has become more consistent. Find proxy rents, use those proxy rents, apply a vacancy, apply an expense ratio, get to an NOI, and apply the cap rate. My concern is, I don't think it's quite as simple as that, because as the assessor has noted, these things will not sell as traditional apartment buildings. Indeed, this particular facility and those of the all seniors are different. There are others who, when they build their independent living facilities, put in kitchens. And that creates the flexibility that if, for whatever reason, the market turned down, there was a saturation in the marketplace, which I actually think is being reached, or the government outlawed these facilities, you could turn them back to traditional apartments. You might even be able to sell them as condos. And I'm aware that there are some that are registered and designed as condos. The ones that I talked about adjacent to 65 Paget, that the Artist REIT people own, those are full kitchens. They could easily be converted into traditional apartments. These cannot. They don't have dishwashers, they don't have stoves, they have a small fridge, they have a microwave. Why? Because the meals are all taken in the common dining room. That's why. So the problem is, when you go into the market with this, you can't sell it as a traditional apartment. Because is anybody gonna rent an apartment without some type of kitchen facility? There might be some people who might actually. People whose specialty in terms of cooking is what I call order out or order in. But generally speaking, you can't market as a traditional apartment, a facility without a kitchen. The other thing that's a little bit unique about these places is that the percentage of each of the units, that is the washroom, is larger because they're made to contemplate mobility-related issues. Maybe a wheelchair, maybe a walker, so the door's wider, the bathroom itself is bigger. That works for the occupants. It doesn't work in a traditional apartment setting where people don't need that extra space typically, and they want more what I'll call living space as opposed to space in the washroom. All of that changes the dynamic of a property of this type, and when you go into the marketplace to sell it, it's not gonna sell like a traditional apartment. And that's my way of ultimately saying to you that when I look at the assessor's calculation, I've made certain adjustments. I've accepted the rents. It's actually the first time I've ever done that. Because, and I said this to the assessor last night, I think for the first time the city is close enough to being there on the rents that I left it alone. Because the issue always was, what's a unit without a kitchen gonna rent for? And so I'd go through a process of making adjustments. I haven't done that this time. I've made a marginal adjustment to the vacancy. I'll explain that to you in a moment. I've made an adjustment to the expense ratio, and I've made an adjustment to the cap rate. And I'm going to explain all of those to you. So if we go to my tabs of my submission, tab 1 is the assessor's workup. It's the calculation of value. And she's presented that, we're fine. Tab 2 is an article on how you value facilities of this type from an Appraisal Institute publication. It talks about what's actually being done here. So we don't, and it's just there for information. The assessor told me she quite enjoyed reading it, so I'm glad for that. Aren't we having a jolly time here today?
It's lovely.
Tab 3, so what I've done here is I've done a recalculation of the expenses. And so page 1 of tab 3 is the summary sheet. Behind it are the questionnaires for those 2 years. And what I've tried to do is separate what I will call the real estate related expenses, and I have taken them as a percentage of the effective gross income. And that gets me to the ratios you see there, that the ratios are 51.53% and 54.59%. Now, is somebody going to quibble with me a little bit about some of the numbers that are in those expenses? Maybe, but to be conservative and take that into account, I've ultimately stabilized the expenses at 46%. The assessor's at 43.15. I've moved it up to 46% taking the view that when I look at the expenses, clearly the expenses of this facility are higher. Again, this is a facility where all of the utilities are in the rent, so we get into that issue again. Arguably, my expense ratio is too low, but that's what I've done. Then we get to the question of the capitalization rate. And again, I've given you an extensive package of capitalization rate materials at my tab 4. It's the city's chart from 2018. This is a low-rise property. For the 2018 cycle, the chart tells us that low-rise buildings had a cap rate at the 20th percentile of 5.25 and at the 80th percentile of 5.5. The 2018 chart tells us low-rise buildings are 4.9 to 5.3. The brokers tell us 5 to 6. For Colliers, 5.5 to 6 for CBRE, but none of them are talking about a facility like this, of course. They're talking about a traditional apartment building. And for all the reasons I've been explaining to you, I don't think an apartment building of this type, and I called it an apartment building and I shouldn't, I don't think a facility of this type can sell in the marketplace at a 5 cap because it's never going to sell. And so my view is that for a combination of reasons, which include the absence of any kitchens, the nature of the configuration, the absence of an appropriate number of parking stalls, there's only 24 here, the fact that the property just won't sell as a traditional apartment, I've indicated that in my view, the capitalization rate has to go to 5.75%. And at my tab 5, you see that calculation. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I will tell you that those 6 that were dealt with 3 weeks ago, my approach to them was quite similar, an adjustment to the expense ratio and a 5.75% cap rate. I will tell you that on all of them, my NOI was used and the panel used a 5.5% capitalization rate in the interest of full disclosure to the panel. That's what we have. I still believe that 5.75% is the appropriate capitalization rate when you compare this type of property to other properties, and so I will urge upon you that that's the rate you should select. The last thing I think I need to tell you relates to the vacancy. The vacancy in 2018 was 5%. It was brought down to 2.6% in 2020. The vacancy in 2017 was 4.8%. I used 3%. So at the end of the day, assessor's gross potential income, 3% vacancy for me, 2.6% for the assessor, 43.15% expense ratio for the assessor, 46% for me, 5% cap rate for the assessor, 5.75% for me, and that's what you have. That's my submission.
Thank you. Questions of the applicant?
Just one on hypotheticals. When we're looking at the capitalization rate, my impression is that you would like the capitalization rate increased based on, one of the factors is the non-kitchen. And in our finding the valuation of just the building, taking away the aspect of the business, we're kind of imagining that the kitchen is involved. But then that's how we came to rents that we can agree on. But then when we're looking at capitalization rate, we're saying, well, they're not really there. So then the cap rate should be increased based on a kitchen not being there. And it's hard to say. How would you say would be a better way of finding more fluidity? Because now we're saying, well, the income is good because we're saying that there is food provided. So we're imagining that it's okay. So we're trying to compare it because otherwise how can we do these properties? But yet for the capitalization rate, then we're saying, well, okay, that's okay for that part, but now we're gonna switch it around. Do you think that that's fair to say that ignore the fact that there's no kitchen for this side, but then apply an increase to the cap rate based on no kitchens?
So I'll answer that in two parts. So I accepted the rents
Yes.
because, in my view, they were close enough, but the rents are not extracted, obviously, from facilities without kitchens.
Yeah.
They're extracted from a set of comparables that do have kitchens. The issue of the cap rate, it doesn't matter what's there, it's what's the buyer gonna perceive as they're buying this, and what do they perceive they're buying, and what do they perceive their risk is. They're not buying a traditional apartment building. So for that reason, in my view, you can't use a traditional apartment building cap rate. That's really the core issue. That issue is illustrated by things like the absence of a kitchen, the low number of parking stalls, the configuration of the units and where the space goes, the fact that, I was gonna say the utilities are all included as part of the rent, but that's really picked up in the expense ratio,
Yeah.
so I'll leave that aside.
Okay.
But that's why, it's all about how the buyer is gonna treat this building, and bluntly, when they're buying a business, they're not buying a business at this kind of cap rate that I'm suggesting either, they're buying it at a higher cap rate. So this is it's a very interesting hypothetical we're dealing with in many ways here.
Just one follow-up. If anyone was to go and buy this property, they wouldn't just be buying the building, they would be buying a business, because it wouldn't be, and yeah, it's hard to put that into cap rates when we're using comparables that are apartment buildings. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Nesbitt?
I have no questions.
Mr. Upton?
Yeah, just on the expense ratio part, you use 46%. And you went to your tab number 3, and you showed us what the expenses actually are.
Yep.
And so you removed some of these numbers to come down to 46.
Yes.
So some of these are overstated because of the type of facility?
No, well, we can have a debate, is the hydro overstated, is the water overstated, is the heating overstated? Are any of these things overstated?
The advertising, for example?
Well, the advertising might be, I acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Because most traditional apartments aren't running a television campaign on a regular basis.
Exactly.
With those smiling elderly people.
I know some of those people.
Do you actually?
I know one of them.
I see, okay.
Who's in this facility?
Oh, all right. Well, then I hope they're happy there.
They are very happy.
Okay, good. But again, I was trying to be conservative, and that's why I went to 46% rather than the number starting with a 5.
It's just a number you extracted in your own, okay.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you.
I have no questions. Summation, either party?
No, thank you.
Okay, we're going to take about a 5-minute break. We'll call the meeting back to order, and we'll go to 161 Quell Ridge Road, whenever you're ready.
This is rule number 07438109200. The assessed value is $9,027,000. Its classification is 20, residential 2. Its liability is taxable. This is an apartment that was built in 1977. There are, it says 9 buildings, 2 to 4 stories with 72 suites. If we look on page 2, we have 16 one-bedroom units, 28 two-bedroom units, and 28 three-bedroom units. The average monthly rent per unit is $1,088.38, with a vacancy rate of 2.6, an expense rate at 50.72, and a capitalization rate at 5%. On page 3, we have some rental comparables, ranging from $936 to $1,155. On page 7, we have, 7 and 8, we have our income and expense information that was submitted. And on page 9, we have an overhead shot of the property and a little bit of a map. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Newman, questions?
Page 2, all model generated, correct?
Yes.
The capitalization rate of 5%, coming back to that conversation at the beginning. If this building were 1974, or maybe 75, would the capitalization rate be 5.3%?
I'm not sure if it would be 5.3% based on the size and the quality, but there would be a difference in the capitalization rate if this property were 2 years older,
Okay,
or is it 3 years older? Very, very close to it.
okay. So the city's gross potential income is based on an average rent of $1,088,
Yes.
and that creates gross potential income of $940,000, and the ultimate net operating income is $451,000. Correct?
Yes.
And if we look at page 7, that's the financial statement for the 2017 year. And it shows total revenue of $817,000 compared to the $940, correct?
Yes.
And it shows net operating income of $409,000 compared to the city's $451,000. Correct?
Yes.
And then if we look at so we'll leave that. And again, the capitalization rate, the model's spitting it out.
Yes.
Okay. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbit?
I have a, just without really getting into this in too much detail, or because we're just seeing this. This is a property that has 9 buildings,
Yes.
2 to 4 stories. So are the expenses of 50%, when you're looking at a property, there's like 9 roofs, 9 everything, like is 50% sort of at the low end of expenses, or would we expect to see something higher? I'm just thinking in terms of the other properties where it's been 1 building, it's been around 49 to 50%, but here it's times 9.
Well, but the thing is though too, that it's 1 building, yes, but 1 very large
Larger
building. Whereas this is 9 significantly smaller buildings. So
So
it's,
costs are lower, you're saying, but
the costs are different.
per,
Because, and the thing is too, that as far as this, if 1 roof has a problem, you can
isolate it to
isolate
one.
the problem and fix a small spot, whereas with the very large building, do you really spot repair, like you can only do
Okay.
that so much before you have to
I see what
do
you're
the whole
saying
thing. That being said, the cost of replacing roofs should be amortized over an extended period of time. It's more of a capital cost, not a general repair.
Mhm.
So if you're looking at the individual units and typical repair and maintenance issues, does it make a difference if it's contained in 1 building or if it's 9 separate buildings?
Okay.
So the expenses, there might be a little bit of different expense. On here, if you look on page number 9, there looks like there's parking in between. But if you look at some of the other buildings, there's a different configuration for the snow clearing and for that type of thing. And it's not that there's necessarily more outside space. All the units have outside windows if you're looking at apartment buildings. So just because it's 9 buildings doesn't mean there's more windows.
Okay,
So all of the things, it's a little, 6 of one and half a dozen of the other.
okay, so it's more a matter of scale.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I have anything
Yeah, just a small point. You say there's 2 stories and 4-story buildings from here? That doesn't look like this. They look like they're all 2-story land.
No, it looks like
you're
there's,
right.
yeah, it looks like they're all 2-story, but I couldn't get a better side view.
Okay. Yeah, I were 4-story then. Are these your comparables all in the same area?
They're in the same market, market area, which is, they matched them up with the CMHC market regions, so that it was easier to compare with those. So they are in the same market region.
Okay.
Mhm.
I just don't know where Quail Ridge Road is.
If you look on page 9, up at the top,
Oh, I see,
there's a
okay.
little map there, and you can see on the one side, there's Sturgeon Road,
Oh, Saskatchewan.
and up at the top is Saskatchewan.
So it's right out the far end, okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
You're
That's all I
welcome.
have right now.
I'm looking at the financial statement and trying to see where you're going to conclude up to the gross for the subject property. So I can't get it up to 940. So these are just averages,
Model,
model?
actual.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Newman?
Can I just ask one
Yep.
more question?
Mhm.
Yes.
I'm just looking at the income statement on page 7.
Yes.
Did you go back to this income statement to check your model?
I took a look at it,
Okay.
But
Did you make any adjustments based on what you saw there?
after the valuation was sent out to, I did not adjust
Okay,
the value.
thank you.
Mr. Newman, the floor is yours.
So, 2 issues, the rent and the capitalization rate. If you look to the attachments in my material, before tab 1, just before tab 1, there are a number of pages numbered in the lower right-hand corner. Look for page number 4. So what this is this is part of the questionnaire. The assessor's got part of this in her material, but not all of it. And you'll see circled at the top of that page, these are the rents that are being reported as being available. And remember, I said to you earlier that we've got rent controls, so you don't just get to move your rents around. And at the end of the day, I think the model is just misreading the quality of this property, and it's setting the rents at a level which is significantly in excess. I mean, the assessor's gross potential income is $940,000. The subject actually generated in the 2017 year, $817,785, taking all revenue streams into account. So obviously that's our biggest issue, and I think that without wanting to belabor it, when you look at the assessor's page 3 in the comparables, one of the things you always need to be careful with is the proportion of units, the mix of units, because of course 2s and 3s will generate more revenue than will 1s. And when I look at some of the comparables, number 2 and number 3, for example, I see a very high proportion of 2-bedroom units, probably in the nature of 60%, whereas the subject is nowhere near that. The subject at 28, for example, is 38%. Now, admittedly, there are 3s in the subject as well. But having said that, at the end of the day, a rent-controlled property can only do what it can do. And the other thing that apartment owners have found is there's another regulation out there called market control. And market control is all about how much tenants are prepared to pay. And at one time, as I said to you earlier, The apartment owners really had their say in terms of what the rents would be, because there was a shortage of units. That's no longer the case. They're discounting rents in order to get tenants in, and I call that market controlled. So I'm suggesting to you that this property is generating the revenue it's generating. Ultimately, I am accepting the assessor's expense ratio, vacancy, but also the expense ratio. But the assessor's net operating income is $451,000. We're not at $451,000 clearly. If you look at my page 5, above forward, tab 1, you'll see my workup, which based on the rents the property is capable of generating, $812,000 of gross potential income with a 2.6% vacancy, the assessor's 50.72% expense ratio. That creates net operating income of $390,000 compared to the assessor's $451,000. The other issue is the capitalization rate. I just think 5% for the age of this property is too low a rate. Again, I say to you that apartment owners are seeing significant competition in the market these days. At one time, the opportunity available to them in buying buildings and upgrading them and being able to bump the rents, that doesn't work so well anymore because of the rules that the residential tenancies branch has created. The broker rates are suggesting higher rates than the 5%, and I'm suggesting to you that based on the age of this property, based on the rates that the brokers are reporting, a rate of 5% is way too low, and I'm selecting a rate of 5.5%. And subject to your questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you. Ms. Martins, questions?
No, thank you.
Ms. Nesbitt?
No questions.
Mr. Upton?
No, I don't have any questions, thank you.
Summation either party?
No, thank you.
No? Okay. Sorry it took so long. Okay. We'll go to 3590 Portage Avenue. The floor is yours, Ms. Martin.
This is rule number 07569026700. The assessed value is $10,944,000. This one was built in 2005 with 59 suites and 61 indoor parking spots with 6 outdoor parking spots. On page 2, see that there are 18 one-bedroom units and 41 two-bedroom units with an average monthly rent of $1,395.76, a vacancy rate of 2.6, expense rate at 43.15, and a capitalization rate at 5%, giving us our $10,944,000. There are some comparable rents ranging from $1,200 to $1,501. And these are in the same market region. The income and expense information is page 7, 8, and 9, and pictures on page 10. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Newman, questions?
Yes. Again, everything on page 2 is model generated.
Yes, it is.
And again, the 43.15% expense ratio function substantially of age.
Yes.
And the cap rate of 5%, age, but maybe some other variables getting into there somehow?
Age, neighborhood, quality, size.
Okay. And if you look at page 9, page 9 is the reported rents.
Yes.
So in the middle of the page, page 9 is the reported rents, and they're $1,064 and $1,173
Yes.
per month. All right. And then page 10 is the photos.
Yes.
So you've got the mapping at the top though of page 10. And so this site outlined in red
Mhm.
is well set back from Portage.
Mhm.
There's a piece of property that sort of looks like a pot to its right.
Okay.
The handle
Yes.
sort of goes towards Portage, and then the pot is more or less in line with the subject.
Mhm.
Do you know what that is?
I didn't check if it was the same ownership, but there's a lot of car dealerships around there, and you can see there's a lot of cars parked there, but, this property is landlocked.
This property is landlocked.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
I'm sorry, I must not be looking at this map properly. Where is it landlocked?
If you look up at the top,
Yeah.
and you'll see Portage Avenue
Yeah.
with the yellow,
Mhm.
and then the red line,
Yep.
the red square that's all the way around
Mhm.
that building.
Mhm.
This building does not have access to a public roadway.
So how, it comes through private property belonging to a neighboring property?
It goes through a
It
neighboring property.
must.
I'm not sure if.
Obviously,
who it's-
cars are getting in there,
Yes,
so.
I'm not sure who it's owned, but there would definitely be some type of agreement unless they also own the other
So
property.
that would pose a little bit of a
Absolutely.
risk to,
Yes.
to the owner
Well,
and the renters.
However, that being said, it was landlocked at time of construction.
Okay.
So this is something that
It
was,
was unknown.
yeah, this wasn't sprung on as a surprise at a later date, this property.
And the vacancy is, on the IME, is it showing I can't see where, it says, there's nothing there. Average percentage space vacant, 0. Okay, thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Upton?
Yeah, again, you didn't have reference to the expense mailer when you did your
No,
evaluation.
no.
That's clearly showing a total income of $883,000.
Yes,
So you obviously feel that the rents they're achieving are not market rent?
It depends on how the market is. This is model. If, like I said before, we get approximately 12,000 income and expense mailers mailed in, and that's why we do mass appraisal. So I did not go afterwards, after the values were put on the properties, I did not go and look at the properties and change the values to match the income and expense mailers, because that's site specific, and that's what we can look at here. But the model for this age of property and this size of property and type and quality and age, this is the model rents that we have from the information that we have received from the mailers. So for the most part, what we do is we take the mailers and we get the information, we put it in, and that's how we come up with our model.
Yeah.
So it's very important that the reported rents actually come in and are the reported and are the rents that we discuss here.
But you send out an expense mailer, you ask for the information, but you don't use the information.
We do use the information.
In the total model used,
Yes, I
but
don't.
not as an individual case.
No, we don't, I don't take the mailer and say, okay, this is the value, because we don't have time to do.
You don't look into the
Site
reasons
specific?
why it's so much lower than the model.
Right, but the problem is too, that it's very common that we get rent rolls, and they give us the information, but the information that they give us is the information of their reported rents, and it's not the actual rents, and then we get actual rents when we're here. So the rents, quite frequently, the discounts, so we do have rents here that might seem like they're high. We get these from using the mailers that come in.
Yeah, for the overall market, you think, yeah.
Yes, so, and that's how we do mass appraisal. And
Okay, yeah.
we can't do site-specific, we don't.
Well, when you're looking at it individually, I thought you might make an adjustment for the
Well, I
information you do receive.
can't go in after the valuations have gone out and go, oh, you know what, I'm just gonna make a couple adjustments here and make a couple adjustments here.
Okay,
But that's,
you can make a recommendation.
I can make a recommendation. But that's why we're here. We're here we discuss site-specific, but I can't do site-specific
Yeah,
at
okay.
my desk.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
appreciate that.
Ms. Martin, the difference between market value, what the model spits out,
Yes,
and compared to the statement, is $100,000,
yes, it is.
which is quite a bit.
It is quite big.
Okay, so, does the model pick up on this particular property, the cellular tower? They have a value here, they get $18,000 a year, which translates, if you cap it at 5%, is $260,000. So,
It's not accounted for.
yeah. So, the fact that the subject probably has an easement going through the property because of, so do you still think the 5% cap rate is applicable?
Absolutely.
Based on the age?
Based on the age and the quality and the location and the size.
Okay. I thank you. Mr. Newman, your presentation.
So let's start with some of the attachments. Let's go to tab 5, which is an overhead photo with the parcel lines on it. And you can see the teardrop is on the subject property. You can see what I called the pot, which ultimately, tab 5,
Thank you.
which ultimately provides the access to the property. And you're right, there is an easement. It's a very unusual arrangement that we have here. And tab 6 is the easement agreement. The subject property is essentially given access to it. If you look to the second page of the easement agreement, you've got paragraph 1 and then a whole series of subparagraphs. You can see paragraph C, the grantor, the grantee, and Glenvale. Glenvale is the subject property. Each have to pay 1/3 of the cost of maintaining the right-of-way and snow clearing. So there's additional expense that you don't see in a typical scenario. Again, that's how they chose to develop this site, and what I say to you simply is much the same thing I said to you in relation to 65 Paget. It's different than when you front on a public street. Now you've got a partner you need to deal with and you need to get along with in terms of how you get access and how the repairs and maintenance get made and done. And if there's a problem, then there may be a problem getting access. So it creates a difference in terms of the operation of the property. The other item I will point you to is tab 3. Tab 3 is a set of comparables that the city presented when we did that independent living facility on 707 Setter. And 707 Setter is right beside 10 Hallenquist. They're in the same location. And so it's very near to the subject property. And when I saw this set of comparables, I was struck by the age of these comparables, and I was struck by where they were and what they were. And in the pages that follow, you've got the photos of these comparables, because I wanted to understand what these comparables were and where they were and what they represented. And what I'm saying to you ultimately is when you look at this set of comparables, it validates the actual rents that are in place, and it validates in my submission to you why the actual rents can be utilized, of 1,064 and 1,173, which creates gross potential income of $807,000 compared to the assessor's gross potential income of $988,000. So obviously that's a very big difference. Then I want to talk to you about the vacancy. The assessor used 2.6%. I took a look at CMHC data. CMHC data for the area, which is found at tab 4, suggested that the vacancy would be higher. Nonetheless, I left the vacancy at 2.6%, but as you'll come to hear me discuss, I did address the capitalization rate. Then the expense ratio, which again, and we've got that 43.15% that we keep hearing about. And again, this is a property where the tenants are paying, included in the rent is all of these utilities. So that's going to drive a slightly higher expense ratio, I would suggest. And then I listed all of the expenses from the 2017 statement, and they totaled $468,000, which came to 55% of the effective gross income. And again, I conservatively stabilized those at 45%, and that's the number I ultimately use. We've got the access to the property issue I've spoken about, and at the end of the day, the assessor's cap is at 5. I've selected 5.25%, consistent with what I did at Paget. Again, I recognize these are both newer buildings. I think we need to get the rent right. Both of them have issues in terms of access and a shared way of access. And so I bumped the cap rate by 25 basis points to 5.25%. And you can see that calculation at tab 8 of my submission, where I've got a value of $8,869,000 compared to the assessor's $10,944,000. And that's up approximately $360,000 compared to the 2018, which was $8,521,000. Subject to questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Ms. Martins, questions?
No.
Ms. Nesbitt?
I have no question.
Mr. Upton?
This is a life lease, is it not?
Yes.
And tell me, on a life lease, I thought they operate on the principle that you invested a large amount of money in the building, for which you paid a much lower rent than normal. Is that the concept of the whole thing?
That was the theory when they started.
So if you put $50,000 into your apartment, you would be guaranteed to get your $50,000 back, and you sell.
Yes.
And some of them are now with an interest payment on that, but you get that amount back. But for your $50,000, you don't pay a market rent, you pay a much less than market rent. Is that correct?
That was the theory.
How does it not work that way?
Because I think what they've come to learn is that their expenses of operating these buildings have actually turned out to be much higher. And so what that's done is it's actually driven up the rents. And that's why, you see here, they're paying $1,064 for the ones and $1,173 for the twos. Doesn't sound like that much of a deal to me. So the rents have come up. But of course, the other thing is that what they did is they took all this money that was raised from these admission fees, the entry fees I'll call them. It's not like they put it there to generate income to serve as a reserve. It essentially became the equity which allowed them to go and build the property and get financing on it. So, as I say, that was the theory, but I don't think it's actually worked out that way as time has passed on. 'Cause
You know, why would I, as a renter-owner, put $50,000 in and then pay a market rent?
As I say, in the beginning, it wasn't supposed to be like that.
It was a new property. Nobody had lived there. And that was it. That was some of the
Well, there are a lot of new
attraction.
apartment buildings that
Yeah.
nobody lived in before, too.
Yeah.
And this particular building, I know this building. It overlooks the Glendale Golf Course and the river.
Yeah, well, it's a ways from the river.
Well, but it overlooks, it's got an aspect from all these suites of, I know it overlooks the Glendale Golf Course and in the distance, the river.
Yes, so, I think this photo gives you a better
Yeah,
tab 5.
yeah, I know where that, yeah, tab 5, yeah.
It gives you a better perspective, I think, of what it directly overlooks.
Well,
And I,
directly, if you look at the slanted portion of the building,
yeah,
that overlooks the Glendale Golf Course,
yes, to the southwest sort of is the golf course.
That's correct, yeah.
Yes,
which, and the Glendale Golf Course is right on the river. Yeah, okay.
but,
So it is an attractive
yeah,
building from the aspect, and they all have balconies that overlook.
yeah. Yeah, and, some of it will overlook the adjacent car dealership, and, some of it will look out towards Portage. But again, every property will have different views. I don't quarrel with you in that regard.
Yeah, okay, it's curious to me how the light lease situation works. And you say this is the actual rents being achieved, but I thought they would be less than market.
But again, to be clear, that's why I gave you tab 3, the comparables that were used on the Setter property,
Yes,
just to support the view that the actual rents in place are reflective of the market. And again, this was a set of comparables that was provided in the context of 707 Setter, which was, again, the all-seniors independent living, which is right
Right.
beside 10 Hallenquist. So new properties, this was the assessor saying, here are newly built apartment buildings, essentially in that same area, almost immediately adjacent. And, that's what the rents were, and those rents, which, the top rent was $1,208, those rents, I think, are reflective of what's actually being charged here. That's why I gave you this.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt, you had
Yeah, I did
further
have a
questions?
question. You indicated just now that they found that in life lease properties, the expenses to operate are higher. Why? Or how?
So, and we saw this in Paget, and, we're seeing this here. They're higher because there have been some issues. I know for sure in Paget, there were some issues about construction. The building had significant envelope issues that had to be fixed. They have found that there's an expectation of a higher standard of maintenance in these buildings. In some ways, they're in a sense owner occupied as opposed to tenant occupied. And so there's a greater demand on them in terms of what goes on in the building. It's the combination of those things, and of course, over time, inflation has increased the price of everything.
So it's just really a function of who's living there.
To some
They're
extent.
putting in some money, they
Yeah.
expect it to be
Yeah.
kept up nicely
Yeah.
because it's not a rental, in the same
It-
sense as a rental.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, I'm just looking at the statement on on page 4, which you probably have in your brief, but I'm sorry, page 7, for the subject property.
Yeah.
And it's dated December 2017.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the assessors.
Oh, the assessors, okay.
But I think it's probably somewhere in your brief. But in just looking at that, and you've used for the subject property, according to your tab, I think it is 8.
Yes.
So you have the potential of $807,000. And on the statement here, it's got, would you not include some of the cellular tower income? $18,000, and some of the interior, exterior parking,
I think those are fair observations.
okay? And what about the internet recovery, cable internet recovery, close to 15,000?
As I said, I think those are fair observations.
So your gross would be a little higher than,
Yes.
okay. I have no other questions. Summation if you so desire. Okay. Mr. Newman, you're okay?
I'm okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, Marion Street, there is a issue there, Ms. Martin, so you can talk about that.
Yes, there is, there's a non-compliance issue. If you look on page, sorry, just let me find my. On page 10, there's the envelope and the tracking details. Page 11 to 16 is the original increment expense mailer, a copy of it showing the date of June 8th, 2018, which is when it was put in the envelope, which is also dated June 8th of 2018. On page 17, there's a request for extension because the mailer had been received. So yes, the two requests that the burden of proof be placed on the applicant for non-cooperation, and if reduction in assessment is ordered, that it follow section 54.3.2 of the master of assessment.
I thank you. Mr. Newman?
The questionnaire that the assessor has attached, starting at page 13, is not the questionnaire I've downloaded online, which I'm holding in my hand and does have some information in it. And I think I'll show this to the assessor first.
Yeah, no, because I didn't have that.
Okay. So I'm going to just hand it up. I have only the one copy. You'll see I've highlighted various things. This property was acquired in, I believe, July of 2017. And so the property manager responded to the questionnaire, providing some information. And you'll see when you look at that document, there's nothing on that page, but when you go to some later pages, you'll see that there is some information. I'll acknowledge that there is not any financial information. but there's certainly information about the nature of the units and the amenities that are associated with the property. So I don't think it's a case of a failure to respond fully. I think it's a case where, considering that the property was acquired at the point in time it was, there was a dearth of information available, and they provided what they provided as reflected in that questionnaire. So again, I say it's not a circumstance where there was a complete failure to respond.
But, Mr. Newman, on the last page though, there's no signature, no dates at all.
I'm telling you, I downloaded
Okay.
it. There's a note.
It's different what you're
Yes,
saying.
But, and there's a note there that indicates that property management was assumed as of January 1.
Yeah.
So that's what the property manager advised
Okay.
me was sent in.
Okay.
So I'm requesting that the requested penalties be denied.
When was this submitted? The date when it's submitted?
Can I just,
Did they meet the extension date?
yeah, I can't tell you that as I sit here, although I know my client actually sent to me some information in this regard the other night, and at my computer I could locate it quickly. With this thing, it might be more complicated.
Robert, do you have any questions in this regard?
Well, I wonder when it was submitted.
Okay.
You're asking me? Yeah, I wonder when it was
Yeah.
submitted. Did they meet the extension date? And I guess why was it not more fully completed?
Yeah, and the answer in terms of the property manager advises, the reason is because the owner had acquired the property as of July, and the full accounting systems and information weren't available.
So Mark, do you know when they took possession at all?
Based on the registration date, it was approximately mid-July, I'm going to say to you, of 17.
Okay. Okay, well, I think we'll maybe shut down the camera and you people can
May I see
I'm sorry?
one? She didn't ask questions.
I'm sorry, yeah.
So they took possession July of 2017, and their information was requested by June of 2018, correct? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I think we'll, yeah, you people can take a little break. Okay, we'll call a hearing back to order, and Mr. Newman, you wanted to make a...
Yeah, I just want to indicate to you that I have found, and there is an email that went to the assessment department on June 27th, 2018, at 3:38 PM in relation to 448 Marion. I've shown it to the assessor, and it does have that document I passed to you with the handwriting on it.
Yep,
It's part of what went forward.
yep,
You know, it is what it is.
yep,
The quantity of what's there is a different discussion,
okay.
but I'm simply indicating that Mr. Upton, to address your question, what was submitted did meet the deadline.
Oh, it did, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're saying it did meet the deadline?
Yes.
It meant the extension.
Pardon?
It meant the extension.
Met the extension, but nothing was in writing, like, no, they granted the extension,
Yes.
and to what date?
June 29th.
Okay, June 29th.
And this arrived,
And-
doesn't it?
And there was nothing complied at that point.
This
That
attachment arrived
attachment?
on June 27th.
Yes. That attachment didn't make it into, I haven't found that in my records, but there's evidence that that made it to the city
Yeah.
within the extension.
I think so. Okay. Mr. Upton's in agreement?
I don't know.
Give us another few minutes. We'll call the meeting back to order. After great deliberations and our decision is that the non-co-op will be denied. So, Ms. Martins, you may present.
This is roll number 0608133200. The assessed value is $1,036,000. This is classified as 20 residential 2, and the liability is taxable. This is an apartment building, 1 building, 2 stories. It was built in 1954. However, it has an effective year built at 1992. There are 8 suites with 7 outdoor parking spots. On page 2, we have the request for information page. And it was showing that we've got a subject sale, July 19th, 2017. The consideration was $1,100,000, and this one value was $1,100,000. On page 3, we have the listing for the property, and it shows that in the remarks, income and expenses and supplements, the residential tenancy branch approved rents are included. Please give notice for showings as the tenants need time, so there are tenants in it at time of purchase. It is rented and available for sale, recently renovated, including the roof, high-efficiency windows, spray foam insulation, wiring, electrical, plumbing, hot water tanks, all new appliances. In every suite, all units have custom cabinets and closet organizers, granite countertops in the kitchen, updated bathrooms, engineered bamboo flooring, newer carpet in the hallways, on-site laundry, plenty of parking stalls, clean and generates nice income. On page 4 are the included photos for the sale. And on page 5, we have our income value summary. The information we have is that there are 5 bachelor units, 2 one-bedroom, and 1 3-bedroom. So 8 units with an average monthly rent of $798.75. Vacancy rate of 1.8%. Expense rate at 42.23%. With a cap at 4.2%, with an estimated market value of $1,036,000. We have some comparable rents on page 6. And these are from, they're again in the same market region. And they range from $768 to $838. On the back page, there's an overhead picture and a picture showing where it's located on Marion. So it's right near where you build over there for the. Okay, Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Newman?
Page
questions?
5, all model generated.
Yes, it is.
So, a 4.2% cap.
Yes.
As I said to you in a phone call, I've never seen a 4.2% cap before. How does the model get a 4.2% cap?
Model gets a 4.2% cap when a property has been, is new, greatly upgraded. I believe that it was taken a look at with, either with previous mailers or, when looking at the sale, it was looked at the income that was generated and at the construction that was done, the upgrades and the construction that was done, and it was to reflect the rents that were, now they're old rents, but the rents previously before, because we don't have the mailer information.
So let me ask you this. Are you aware generally of the concept that people will buy, I'll call them older apartment buildings, which have not been upgraded? They'll go in, they'll spend money, they can then apply to residential tenancies, and they can get rental increases improved.
Yes.
And so that creates an opportunity for a buyer of that type of property to get a lift in the rents and ultimately a lift in the net operating income.
Yes.
And I'm going to suggest to you that the circumstances where we see low cap rates are circumstances where people are buying an opportunity in the sense that they can buy a property that's not been upgraded, do the upgrade, and therefore achieve a better end result for themselves. You agree?
Well, so does that mean that we should be looking at the older rundown properties and giving them low cap rates as opposed to giving properties that have just been upgraded throughout, and giving, so a nice, a recently redone property that has all these upgrades and is ready to generate a high rent because it's already had the work put into it, so all the money that it takes to put into upgrading a building, but then it should get a higher cap rate because a property that needs a lot of work and is starting to get run down should get a low cap rate?
No. I mean, ultimately, how we derive cap rates is a function of the net operating income.
Yes.
And those properties where we see low cap rates, I'll suggest to you, is because the income is low, the sale price is higher, and when you do the math, you get a lower cap rate, of course.
Yes.
So, my experience is that when the department says a property is sold at a 4.5 cap rate, for example, that's a property where the department is using the actual net operating income in place, using the sale price, which is somewhat higher because the buyer is buying an opportunity, and the mathematics then drives the lower cap rate.
Okay.
But the investor who's buying that property at that higher price isn't buying on the expectation that that existing NOI will be his NOI. He's buying on the expectation that he'll do the work, get the bump in the rents, and his NOI will be much higher.
Yes.
And so that then results in the question, is that really a reflection of, is that low cap rate a reflection of what the property's going to be and that buyer's expectation? So all I'm really asking you here is, when this property is bought, the reno has been done already. Okay, so it's in place. This is a 1954 building,
Yes.
which has been given an age variant up to 1992. So it's not a new building.
Nope.
It's a building with, I'm gonna call it old bones, and it's been given, and I'm gonna call it lipstick and rouge, in the sense that it's been made to look nicer.
Yes.
in the anticipation that tenants will be prepared to pay a higher rent. So when I say to you, where does a 4.2 cap come from? Are you telling me that this one got looked at site-specifically and it got adjusted?
I'm telling you that when the information came to the department, the numbers didn't get adjusted. The quality and condition and the characteristics of the property were adjusted to more accurately reflect what we were seeing in the market. It was also looked at the sales price and noted that when the characteristics are adjusted, the value that we are coming out with from the model is more reflective of the sale price.
So we've just looked through the course of the morning
Mm-hmm.
at Paget, built in 2005 or 6 or 7 approximately. Glenvale, built in 2005 or 6. I mean, we've looked at a number of newly built properties on this docket. Hallenquist, never mind its issues about what type of facility it is, but just based on its age, built approximately 11 or 12 years ago. So these are newly built properties. They're getting 5s.
Yes.
And you told us earlier that the bracketing, the 1998 and forward is a bracket.
Yes.
So this one doesn't even fall into that 1998 bracket. It falls into a different bracket. All these other ones that we've looked at, the Pagets and the Hallenquists, and the 3590 Portage, they're all getting a 5. How is this one getting a 4.2?
With the other properties, we also spoke about risk, and there's a lot of risk in those properties. And right now, when we're looking at this property, the risk would be reduced for this property based on size. It's 8 units.
Yes.
So you're looking at finding 8 tenants, and you're not looking at the flex from having 100 tenants or 66 tenants. This is, so there's a lot of reduced risk, and we're looking at a property that, when this was reviewed, because there was a sale, and the staff person looked at the sale, looked at the characteristics, looked at the notes that were given based on the sale and on the sales mailer, and all the information that they had, and then they looked at the characteristics, and it's found that when the value is generated from the characteristic changes, it is reflective of the sale.
Okay. So let me ask you this. 5 bachelor units.
Yes.
So 62.5%, 5/8 of the units are bachelors. The comparables on page 6. Not many bachelors in that set of comparables on a percentage basis, is there?
Not many. There's also a 3-bedroom unit. And it's difficult to find comparables with that type of mix.
Okay. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
No, I have no questions.
Mr. Upton?
Done right now, thank you.
Ms. Barton, I guess there's the cap rate. It's very, very low for an older building that's been renovated. So what I looked at is, you know, based on the sale price, based on the NOI, okay, the cap rate works out to be 3.95.
Which NOI?
Current,
The model driven?
model driven,
Right.
model driven,
Okay.
yeah. So,
It would be much easier if we had a mailer which would show the information that were for actuals. that would make our discussion much easier to do and much more valid.
All right, Mr. Newman, your presentation.
So in my presentation, I raised two issues. I raised the issue of the expense ratio, and I raised the issue of the capitalization rate. I left the gross potential income alone. Frankly, as I look at it and look at the comparables, maybe I ought not to have done that, because it seems to me the comparables don't have the same weighting of bachelor units that the subject does, but so be it, that's what I did. The expense ratio, I was pointing to the fact that this place has electric heat, and in my mind, that's more expensive, and so I was looking, and the assessor was at 42.23%, and I was looking for a move to 45%. But at the end of the day, my real issue is the capitalization rate. I almost get the feeling that somebody looked at the sale and said, we're going to chase the sale to come to a cap rate. And yes, I know this individual bought it for this price, and God only knows, as I sit here today, what this individual was thinking. But that's what happens in the market sometimes. People make decisions, and there's lots I could tell you about this property in terms of what's happened since. But that's all post-reference, so that'll be for the next go-around on this property. But I can't accept a 4.2% cap rate for a 1954 built property that's had the lipstick and rouge applied and is now effective 1992. When we look at the other properties that have come before us today, the Pagets, the 3590 Portage, the 10 Hallenquist, all of them starting with 5. We don't accept the 5 there, but they're starting with 5. We look at these, the city's data in terms of the cap rates and their chart. None of that points to a 4.2 cap rate. And I think very conservatively, I applied a 5 cap to my slightly adjusted net operating income, because I increased the expense ratio to 45%. I applied a 5 cap to that, and that drives $828,000. I'll just make an observation about the assessor's comment, small building, 8 units, lower risk. Well, certainly you need to look for a smaller pool of tenants. I'll agree with that. The problem is you lose one tenant, you've got a 12.5% vacancy. So there's pros and cons about that, I'll suggest to you. And I think at the end of the day, most property owners would be of the view that they'd rather have the bigger building where the occasional vacancy is sheltered by the size. Here, there's no shelter for the size, and every month that you're vacant takes away a big chunk of your income. So I'm asking for $828,000, and subject to your questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Ms. Markman, questions?
Yes. The expenses, it's a higher expense for the heat on here, but is there any consideration made for the new high-efficiency windows, the new spray foam installation, and the new, all of the new upgrades, and what are the actual expenses that are being generated?
My sense is that the model, which sets the ratio at 42+%, is already driven by newer buildings, which will have all of those items, because that's how you have to build to code these days. So that's why I think that's already factored into the model.
I think that it's covered for the model with the condition and quality being upgraded, but for your expenses, because with the increased cost for being electric heat, did you decrease anything for having upgraded windows and spray foam?
I didn't, but what I'm saying to you is, I believe the model is driven by newer built properties, which have all of those things by virtue of today's building code.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt?
I have no questions.
Mr. Upton?
You can't speak to the sale price at all, Mark.
I can't,
You have no knowledge of,
I don't know what motivated this buyer, I don't know what he thought he was buying. I know how it's turned out, and it just doesn't make sense.
okay, thank you.
Who buys 5 bachelor units for that kind of price?
Somebody in St. Boniface.
Well, I wondered if the sale price included something additional.
I'm not aware of that.
I have a question for the assessor. The value of the permits taken out, do you have that?
I don't have the
No.
value of the permits.
And that was back
It was.
prior
2000
to the sale?
Yes,
Okay.
recently renovated, 2011.
Okay.
And they've got the 2011 renovations and the list of them on page 3.
Okay. Summation to the party?
Thank you.
I'm
Okay.
fine, thank you.
Okay. St. Anne's Road, 355, whenever you're ready.
This is roll number 080027500000, 355 St. Anne's Road. The assessed value is $2,192,000. And this is an apartment building, 2 stories, built in 1963 with 29 suites and 16 outdoor parking spots. On page 2, we see that there was a dollar sale in 2013, and it had a sworn value of $2,400,000. And if we look at the, for the sales verification, we've got the mailer here from 2013 showing their income. I should double check my math. Sorry. Sorry, we'll just skip over that. On page 4, we have the income value summary. There are 26 one-bedroom units and 3 two-bedroom units with an average monthly rent of $736.74, a vacancy rate of 2.6%, an expense rate of 53.48%, and a cap of 5.3, giving us our $2,192,000. There are some rent comparables on page 5, ranging from $723 to $789. On page 9, we have the income. And on page 12, there's an overhead shot and, 2 overhead pictures and a map of where this property is. Thank you.
Ms. Martins, are you done?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Newman?
Page 1, 1963 built and effective age 1963, so no improvements noted to the building. not enough to increase the effective age.
That's right, thank you.
All right. Page 2, you made reference to the sale
Yes.
in 2013. Did you look into that sale at all?
The notes that we have on file are that the, it was a dollar sale or estate sale, but the sworn value appears to represent a reasonable market value.
So, but the notes indicate it was an estate sale, so therefore it's not arm's length, right?
It was not arm's length, hence the $1.
Yes.
But the sworn value, it's, even with dollar sales, they are expected to get them to market because with tax issues and things of that nature.
Page 4 is the model,
Yes.
and again, the capitalization rate, this is gonna fall into that 1946 to, well, I'm not sure, maybe the 1960 to 1974 category.
Yes.
Okay. The comparables on page 5, again, did you compare the mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units?
I made an attempt. It's difficult because all buildings are built differently, so you can see that for the most part, there are double digits of the 1-bedroom units and single digits of the 2-bedroom units.
Right. You're showing 26 one-bedrooms. Does this property not have 2 bachelors and 24 one-bedrooms?
Not according to our records.
Okay. Look at page 11. This is the questionnaire,
Okay.
and it seems to indicate 2 bachelors, 24 ones, and 3 twos. Also on that page, you got an indication of what the rents are,
Yes.
correct? And you'd agree with me that under the rent control legislation in Manitoba, if those are the rents, increases are quite limited by those regulations?
Yes.
And so the owner indicates that creates gross potential income of $212,988, and the city is at $256,000 based on the model.
Yes. And if you look though on page 9, they are also getting laundry income. And, yes, they're also getting laundry income on that, and parking.
So taking all that revenue into account, that would bring us to $219,000, and the model says $256,000.
Yes.
All right. Those are my questions.
I thank you, Ms. Nisbet.
I have no questions.
Mr. Upton?
No, I don't think any for me right now. Thank you.
Did you get a chance to look at the property?
No, I did not.
Okay. So you can't really say whether there's 2 bachelors in there or are they 1 bedrooms?
No, I
Hard
can't.
to say, eh?
No, our valuation was based on
Okay.
no bachelors.
But I just looked at the page 11, and there's, you know, with the 1 bedroom, there's only like a $5 difference. So
Yes.
maybe it might be based on the size. And Mr. Newman brought up the fact that according to the statement, etc., the gross should be more or less including the other income factors, about 219 gross-wise.
Market, actual is approximately 219.
Mr. Newman, the floor is yours.
Two issues, rent and capitalization rate. So at the end of the day, even including the ancillary income, the property's generating 219 and change. The model puts it at over 256,000. As the assessor has acknowledged, these properties are subject to rent control. You don't get to simply just push the rent up. This is a 1963 building which hasn't had enough done to it to warrant a change from that effective date, so it's a dated property. I'm suggesting that the actual rents in place should be utilized. The expense ratio was accepted, so now we have the issue of the capitalization rate. So this one gets 5.3, it's a 1963 building. Again, I say to you, when you look at the cap rate charts, what you're seeing is the brokers reporting higher rates. It's a dated building, I'm going to suggest to you, and accordingly I've utilized a 5.5% capitalization rate. Tab 4 of my material is my calculation of value. I use the actual rents in place, which gave us gross potential income just shy of $213,000. Perhaps there needs to be another $7,000 added to that for the other items we've talked about. Same vacancy, same expense ratio, $96,506 of NOI at a 5.5 cap, $1,754,000. Subject to questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Ms. Martin's questions?
No, thank you.
Ms. Nisbet?
No questions.
Mr. Upton?
Yeah, you've shown the potential gross income of 212,988.
Yeah.
The statement from the owner shows 2019 after vacancy. Take it out. So you've got vacancy down below that, so after vacancy is 219,170 compared to the assessor. What's the assessor's figure here?
249.
Yeah, 249, yeah, not 250 something, but 249.
Yeah. Yeah. Round number's still a $30,000 difference.
To the two, yeah, to 219.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Summation?
No, thank you.
Nope. Okay. Number 37 Ashton Avenue, the last one on the docket. Whenever you're ready.
Roll number 080023040000. The assessed value is $1,026,000. This one is classified as 20, residential 2, with a liability status of taxable. This is an apartment building. It's one building, 2 stories, built in 1966, with 12 suites and 12 outdoor parking spots. This property has 9 one-bedroom, 3 two-bedroom units with an average monthly rent, average monthly rent per unit at $801.87. We have a vacancy at 2.6, expense rate at 53.48, and a cap at 5.1, which gives us our $1,026,000. We have comparables on page 3 that range from $784 to $838. On page 9, we have our we have our overhead picture and a small map. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, questions?
So, built 1966, effective age 1966, so not enough done to change the effective age. Page 10 shows the location, so it's got an Ashton address, but it's actually on the corner of Ashton and St. Anne's Road.
Yes.
Last property we did, 355 St. Anne's Road. So they're in the same neighborhood certainly. This one gets a 5.1% cap rate. The last one got a 5.3% cap rate.
Yes.
And you explained to me, they're essentially the same age.
We don't have a shopping cart of cap rates. This is the model, and there's lots of factors that play into it.
Not the age and location, I wouldn't think.
Not the age and location. How many units were in our last one? It could be
29 in the last one.
it could be in the middle where the size impacts this. I don't know all of the features of the model. It's the model, but there are differences in the two buildings. And
So the model believes that an investor will perceive that there's lesser risk with the 12-unit building than a 29-unit building if size is the factor.
if size is the factor, then that would be something that we've looked at from the information that
Excuse me.
we've been given. So the model isn't just picking numbers out of the air, the model looks at sales that have been submitted, and this would be reflective of the cap rate analysis that has been done.
Okay. And page 9 is the financial statement, and it shows the comparable 2017 in the current year-to-date column and 2016 in the previous year-to-date column, correct?
Yes,
And the net operating incomes reflected are $26,900 in 17 and $33,940 in 16. And the assessor's net operating income is $52,000.
I think that that's taking things very generally. If we look at, more specifically, if we look at the income is comparable to what we have. And if we look at.
I agree, very
Yes.
similar.
The income is very similar. And I didn't take apart with a fine tooth comb all of the, I'm not quite sure what sundry and administration are included in there, and I didn't do an analysis of what it is per unit.
Okay.
But yes, there's a difference in our net operating income.
Okay. They can come in the front door, they don't need to come in that way.
It's caulking around it.
Oh,
Oh, it's repairs, it's not somebody trying to get in.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are my questions, thank you.
thank you. Ms. Nesbitt,
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Mr. Upton.
No, none right now, thanks.
Okay, I just noticed, I guess, in the regards to vacancy, so that would bring, if you take off the vacancy for your potential, you're at the exact same figure that you have there. Okay, so is there a problem calculating the vacancy and you're using 2.6 and it's 5% for if you do the numbers, so.
I'm sorry, it's 5% on which?
Vacancy over the potential gross. According to the statement.
Oh, their vacancy?
Yep.
Well, they would be using their actuals in their statement.
Okay. I have no other questions. Mr. Newman, the floor is yours.
So, I accepted the gross potential income, I accepted the vacancy, I looked at the expenses. The assessor's got a net operating income of $52,000. I said the expenses here are somewhat higher, so I moved the expense ratio up to 59%. That created a net operating income of $46,111 compared to the assessor's $52,320. Having said that, then the issue becomes the capitalization rate. I'd really like to have a manual for this model. It would be interesting reading, you know, I don't know what the answers are to all these things, but I just say that I don't think investors are looking at a property of this type, 1966, and thinking it's a 5.1% cap rate when these properties built a dozen years ago, 12, 13, 14 years ago, are sitting at 5%. To me, there's a disconnect there, and I know I'll hear about size, and the problem with size is when you have a vacancy, it really impacts. So I think the cap rate is too low. I've set 5.5%, and that drives a value of $838,000, and that's what I have to say.
I thank you. Ms. Martin, questions?
No, thank you.
Ms. Nesbitt?
In your brief, on page, I guess it's page 1 of your appeal brief, you say that the expense ratio of 53.48 is inadequate considering the size of the building, and so
Right.
you've increased it to 59
Right.
in your proposal. Why is it inadequate?
So there's always economies of scale. If I've got 12 units, then if I need to trade out to do some work, for example, it's a smaller job. It may be more difficult to find a trade. It's going to be more costly, I'll suggest to you, on a unit value basis because of the economies of scale. Trades would rather do a bigger job. You'll get better pricing on a bigger job than you will on a smaller job. So I just think the building, because of its size, becomes a little bit more complicated to operate. And when I looked at the expenses reflected in the statement, clearly they were higher, and I just felt overall a higher allowance was appropriate. I mean, remember, on the basis of the statement, the NOIs are, let's call it 27,000 in 17 and 34,000 in 16. I put us up at 46,000 and change. So, you know, I haven't gone to the exact numbers in terms of the expenses, but I just think overall they're a little bit more expensive to operate these smaller buildings.
Thank you.
Mr. Upton?
No, I don't have anything.
Summation of either party?
No, thank you.
No?
Okay. I think that about cleans up the docket. So, thank you, Mr. Newman. Thank you, Ms. Martin.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having me.